Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to start looking at auto wiring in Spring. Auto wiring lets you tell Spring to try to figure out itself how your beans are all connected. So it tries to figure out the dependencies between beans and wire them up automatically. And by the way, something that I should really have mentioned earlier, and I'll mention it now, is that you can have beans where one bean is dependent on another bean, so you want to inject the second bean into the first bean, but the second bean has something that it's dependent on, so you want to inject some third bean into the second bean as well. You can have chains of dependencies, and Spring will instantiate the beans in the right order automatically in order to try to fulfill those dependencies, so you don't have to worry about the order beans are defined in your program. Now, if you want to wire up your beans manually, we've seen how to do that. So I've got an example here. I've got a logger class, and it's got two properties. One is called console writer and one is called file writer. And these are two separate objects, two separate dependencies that need to be injected into this logger class. And we've got appropriately named set methods for those two different kinds of writers, console writer and file writer. These are all just classes that I've created myself. They're not standard classes or anything. And this logger has a write file method and a write console method. And app.java gets the logger bean and uses those two methods. But the logger requires these beans, the console writer and file writer, in order to implement those methods. So the details of this example don't matter, but the basic point is we've got a class here which we've got to wire two beans into. And we've seen how to do it previously. We could here I've got my logger bean defined in my XML, and I've also defined a console writer bean and a file writer bean of those class types, they're just things that I made up myself with dummy implementations. And actually they implement this interface here, log writer, but that doesn't matter, so just don't worry about that for the moment. So the point is that we want to wire these two beans into the two properties of this bean here. And we've seen that we could do that using either inner beans, or we could define properties here which then refer to the IDs of these beans. Either of those would work. But a third possibility is to use Spring auto wiring. There are several different kinds of auto wiring, and we're going to start by looking at auto wiring by type, because it just so happens that the two properties that we want to wire here both require beans to be injected that are of different types. So this method wants a console writer, this method wants a file writer. So these two set methods want beans of different types, and we've got exactly one bean of each type on hand ready to be injected. So if you have those circumstances where it's clear just by looking at the types of beans what has to be injected where, in other words, which set method has to receive which bean, just by looking at the types, then you can auto wire by type. So let's go to the beans view here and let's click on logger. And we can see that we've got an auto wire attribute here. So let's set that. We've got various choices here, and we can set it, let's say, to by type, like that, and I'll save it. And now if you run this with a bit of luck, it's going to work. So there we go. We've got the main method here saying hello there and also hi again. And that's being run here and here with the write console and write file methods of logger. And logger in turn implements those methods using file writer and console writer, which are these two beans here that we injected with these methods. And we're actually taking those beans from the XML here and we're auto wiring them into the properties here. So we've set those two properties successfully by auto wiring. Now there are various pitfalls in wiring stuff up automatically. One is just that if you have a big project and you've got a lot of auto wiring going on, then it might make it hard to understand what's exactly going on. So if auto wiring starts to seem confusing or your project is huge, then just consider maybe not using it. But it could be useful under some circumstances. It's a nice thing to have, certainly. The other problem is that you must not have any ambiguity if you try to attempt auto-wiring. So here, there's no ambiguity. We've got two properties that we want to set, and we've got two beans, and the classes match the properties. So we've got exactly what we need, console writer and file writer. We've got exactly the two beans that we need to wire into those properties. But look what happens if there is ambiguity. Let's copy one of those beans and paste it and give it a different ID, console writer 1, let's say. Now there's ambiguity because we've got two console writer beans, and so either of those could be wired into this property, this console writer property. So now if we run the program, let's run it here, we get an error because there's ambiguity, and Spring will not auto-wire stuff if it's ambiguous. It's not trying to do fuzzy logic. It's only going to auto-wire stuff if it's absolutely clear what should be wired where, according to straightforward fixed procedure. We could also have ambiguity in this particular case in a different way, because it just so happens that both of these beans, my console writer and file writer classes, in this particular case I happen to have made them both implement a interface, the same interface, which I've called log writer, and that's just a really simple interface I've created that says they should both have write methods that accept a string. Actually, it's quite common to use interfaces in Spring, perhaps even more than you would in ordinary Java, because if you have like a property that expects an interface type, you can inject any implementing type into that property. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. The point is that both of these beans implement this interface. So if it were the case that one of these methods had the interface type, again would have ambiguity. Let's go back to beans.xml, get rid of this second bean that I've just added. So we'll leave the XML as it was before, and I'll run the program to show that it works. There we go. But suppose now, if we go to logger, that this set console writer, let's say, expected something of the interface type, which both file writer and console writer implement, which is log writer. So I'll set this to log writer, and the property expects log writer. Again, we've got ambiguity now, and if I run that, I should expect an error. Because if we look at the beans.xml, these both implement that interface. So how can Spring know which of those beans you intend to wire into this property? Because either of the beans would do once again. I'll change that back anyway so you can peruse working source code at your leisure. That's auto-wiring for you, and we're going to go on to look at the different types of auto-wiring, and later on we'll see a arguably more elegant form of auto-wiring involving annotations, but for the moment we're sticking with XML. So that's it for this tutorial, and until next time, happy coding.